It provides opportunities around the globe. If you want to explore the world, you can explore the world. Work in a field where you do good for the planet. We will not be able to do offshore wind, and we are not going to transition without insurance and a proper understanding of how we manage our risks. Every day is different. Now I know everything about offshore wind, and the next day tells you, no, you don't know anything about it. Everything is different. Everything is new. I think that keeps me going.
Martin, great to see you.
Good to see you.
You're at Marsh Asia, and you're focused on insurance across the energy transition, but specifically global offshore wind. So tell us a bit about your role and what do you do? You're very passionate. You're the most passionate insurance person I've ever met. So tell us.
How's
tell
that
us why
possible?
you're
How
so
can you be passionate about insurance? That person must be very, really crazy. First and foremost, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure and looking forward to this session today and talk a bit about, risk and insurance, obviously big topics for our industry and for, investors and all stakeholders involved. I don't know. I've been doing renewable energy insurance for more than 20 years, and I joined Marsh, I think, 2013 with a strong focus on offshore wind. Moved to Asia in 2019. And, I think you're right. How can you like insurance? I think it's less about insurance, but more about risk and the complexity of our business and, trying to help the industry to get those turbines into international waters around the globe is, my way to contribute to, or our way to contribute to the energy transition, basically. And, it's like where, I hate renewing my own private content insurance, right? No one really likes that. But this particular field where, every day is different and you always think, now I know everything about offshore wind, and the next day tells you, no, you don't know anything about it. Everything is different. Everything is new. I think that keeps me going and, really believe in this being the future.
That's exciting. Yeah, it's great to hear the passion. And I think we share that passion for our industry. Of course, we help clients on the financing side, and what's interesting, and I'd love to get your take, but what we find is when clients to come to us, for financing, and it's not an afterthought, but it could definitely happen earlier. The earlier conversation, understanding, the specifics of the project and the sponsor and so on. Do you find that in insurance, and what things do you see most common with your clients?
It's exactly the same thing, right? I think when I started with offshore wind with Marsh in 2013, we were always called like 5 to 12 just before financial close, a few weeks or months, and then had to, solve the problems that were created over the past months during, I don't know, the FEED stage or development stage of the projects. That has changed a lot, I think, because there's a stronger appreciation for how complex projects are and how important risk management and hence insurance is. And I think also when we moved away from feed-in tariff projects and more towards competitive bidding procedures, where there's a longer time between the project award and then the financing process, and where for the bidding stage, you already need to know, okay, what will be my life cycle insurance costs and the likes, that naturally we've been involved much earlier the last few years, which is great, right? We can really start from scratch and say, listen, if you decided this technology or that contractor or this park layout, this is going to have XYZ impact on, insurers' appetite, insurance costs and the like. So there's a positive trend of being involved much earlier.
So maybe for someone that's listening that doesn't understand the landscape, specifically around offshore wind insurance, give us a little bit of an overview. Who are the players? How do they differ regionally? And then the type of projects that you see most often.
The offshore wind insurance market has changed a lot over the years, right? We're doing offshore wind since 1991, obviously much smaller than these days, but the insurance market had to go through similar learning curves as everyone else, right? It was a very attractive industry, picking up in speeds very quickly in, 2015, 2016 in countries like UK, Germany, Netherlands. Insurers were super interested because it was big premium tickets. Offshore wind is very expensive from an insurance perspective. So as an insurer, you can make bigger tickets much quicker than if it was onshore solar wells. A lot competition in Europe, and then claims came in, right? As soon as the projects entered construction phase, operational phase, things went wrong. New contractors caused problems, new designs caused problems, everything caused problems. So the claims ratios, we call them, went through the roof, and insurers, stopped earning money with it, right? They paid more back to clients than they earned from clients through the premiums. And I'd say just before COVID, 2018, 2019, the market had experienced what we call the hardening market, the hardening insurance market. So insurers' appetite goes down, less capacity available from insurers. They look much more into details and really scrutinize projects for, this is not great. We don't like that. We don't like that. Much more, how do you say, decisive, what they write and what they don't write, and also much higher premiums, much higher deductibles, and for less coverage. So in 2019, that was a big, big change where premiums, to some extent, doubled from what they were before, or even more, for actually less coverage. Now, this is again turning back to what it was before. That's what we call the softening market. So it gets softer, there's more capacity available, more appetite from insurers, deductibles go down, premium rates go down, so costs go down. And this is a normal cycle, right? I think to some extent we are still in a stage of, trying to be mature, which is super difficult because offshore wind is not mature, right? It's compared to, offshore oil and gas, where we know how to build oil and gas rigs, and we've been doing that for decades. Offshore wind is still, developing, enhancing technologies, entering new territories, and so on and so forth. We are not at a point where we can say this is, standardization, industrialization, and that is also very difficult for insurers. So things change. But what I can say is there is a much, much higher appetite for offshore wind. I think also because insurers have made their own commitments to ESG, sustainability. They are moving away from coal, they are moving away from offshore oil and gas, and they need to compensate lost revenues there with other business. Another business that the fastest growing right now, apart from, data centers, is renewable energy and offshore wind. So the appetite is there. We are just in that phase of, trying to find out what's the most sustainable way to insure projects.
That's very helpful, Martin. And a little bit more on the landscape, like who are the players that you see the most active in this space?
I'd say there's a couple of insurers. Pretty much everyone is probably aware of, also from personal insurances like, Allianz, Munich Re, Swiss Re, SCOR. There are a couple of players who are probably less known from someone who hasn't done offshore wind, but big managing general agents like RiskPoint, smaller firm, but very strong and with very strong expertise. Guard, who were previously known as Guard, they've been doing business for as long as I can think, but they've bought the offshore wind business from Codan, who were an offshore wind from, I think, day one as one of the leading offshore wind insurers with great expertise. I think today we've got 50, 60 insurers who really look into offshore wind, some of them as really knowledge partners, as what we call lead insurers, who can lead your project and provide you with offshore wind expertise and handle claims and risk engineering and the likes. Many of them more in an observing role, what we call a follow insurer, who would just follow an experienced lead insurer and provide additional capacity to make sure that we can insure those projects 100%. But there is, as I mentioned, the Alliances and Swiss Re's and Munich Re's and the likes, who are globally offering capacity in Asia Pacific and Europe and elsewhere.
You talked a bit about the trends and what we're seeing, and obviously with well, tell us a bit about kind of how do insurers look at mature markets like Europe versus emerging markets, say in Asia.
I think it's fun to say because the markets are different from, or vary from insurer to insurer. I think clearly looking at Europe, it's, as you say, Philip, a much more mature market. Even when you look into, countries like the Baltics or elsewhere, we probably haven't really built offshore wind, but it's the Baltic Sea. It's typically a much easier environment technically. Sometimes soil conditions are a bit of a challenge, but generally in terms of, weather conditions, water depths, it is something we know and we've been working with for decades. There's no natural catastrophe risk. Vessel availability is much better. Supply chain in general is much better because factories are more or less around the corner. It takes you days to get a vessel from A to B. And I think that was where the insurance market struggled a bit when we started building offshore wind in Asia, right? When Taiwan really ramped up business and first large-scale projects were built. And we thought like, we just continue as we've done it in the past. And then very quickly we had to find out, whoa, it takes weeks to get a suitable vessel from Europe to Taiwan if we need to repair something in big scale. And, we've got typhoons. How are we dealing with those? And they can cause significant damage. And we can also not really work during typhoon season. And on top of typhoon season, we also have a monsoon season where this may impact our installation schedule and the like. So very different. And supply chain, of course, right? Very, very little supply chain now slowly developing. And we do see good news, like we've just seen from another major cable supplier now starting to establish business in Asia. But it's a very different market, also for insurers. You do see a difference between insurers who still handle Asia Pacific or Asian business from Europe compared to those who've established their own teams in Asia. So they are much closer to the region, much better understanding of local specifics, local circumstances. I think that's very important. That's also why Marsh, for example, has decided to establish a separate specialized team for Asia and not try to solve everything from Europe. But I think that's the main difference between the two markets, that still Europe, of course, for very good reasons, is perceived to be much more mature. But it's also much more competitive, which also doesn't always come with only advantages.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting as you see the OEMs, the Chinese OEMs looking to expand. How does that? How do the insurers look at that?
Yeah, there's a big topic on Chinese OEMs. I'd like to extend the question a little bit and speak about general, emerging suppliers. I think a couple of years ago we had a similar conversation on, for example, GE as a turbine supplier, and we all know how well that played out so far. But now obviously it's the Chinese because they offer very, very aggressive pricing for extremely strong contracts and actually not too bad technology, I would say, from my very limited technical knowledge. I think the future will really need to tell us. I think what we can say so far, and that's purely from an onshore wind experience, where the Chinese wind turbine suppliers have been supplying the world for much longer already, be it in Latin America or Australia or even in Asia outside China, less so in Europe still, where experience is actually not too bad. As I said, technology is really picked up. The quality of QA, QC, materials, design, manufacturing processes are comparable to what we see from international suppliers. So far, what I see is that suppliers stick to their contractual commitments. We will need to see how that plays out long term, right? No one knows whether they will disappear after 5 years or 10 years. That's too early to say, but from what we can say today is it works out quite well. It's, again, just a question of, the industry starting to accept them or still trying to solve problems and accelerate the energy transition with only two major offshore wind turbine suppliers. I think that's going to be a challenge, right? I really don't know how that's going to work for Europe. My general experience is that when the Chinese have got a strategy and they are fully committed to what they have decided, they will just do it, right? It's a matter of time. I may be wrong for Europe here, but in Asia we clearly see them coming. In the Philippines, where offshore wind is now really picking up, we do see first projects in Korea, thinking of Chinese technologies, where Korea said for many years we are not going to do it. Even Japan, they are thinking about it, where I felt like this is never going to happen, and it happens. So there's a trend that we'll see them overseas. Insurers, sorry, just to get back on that question. As I said, insurers are, pragmatic. They look at, okay, what's the technology? Is the technology safe? Is it good? I think that's a tick the box so far from the experience. The technology is as good as from Siemens Gamesa or Vestas. And the second, which is still a bit the question mark, is how do they live? How do they execute the contracts? Will they stick to their commitments? Will they come back when there is, major component exchange needed on something and it's under warranty or whatever? So far, it feels good. So when you ask an insurer these days, he would say, listen, I'm fine. It's not going to be more expensive. It's not going to be less coverage I can offer. It's very comparable to what I will offer you for any of the more known international suppliers. And they will just look into, all the technical and contractual details. They will also look at when it's Siemens Gamesa or Vestas turbine.
Maybe just to expand a bit on that. There are different types of insurance. Obviously, at the construction stage, there's, after the project is operating, as part of O&M insurance, we know is a big part of that. Talk a bit about where do insurers play a role in the life cycle of an offshore wind project?
Obviously, much later involved. As the majority of risk advisory is typically done by companies like Marsh, so the risk advisors. Insurers you would typically reach out to 6 or 9 months prior to financial close when everything is more or less decided in terms of, design, project layout, technologies, decisions are made, contracts are more or less finalized. And then it's really, okay, we want to go to financial close. We need to start procuring insurance, and that takes you 6 to 9 months. And that's where insurers really start to be involved. They would want to be involved much more, and that's for good reasons, because they have massive knowledge, maybe the best knowledge about what can go wrong of all of us. But when you've got a good risk advisor and insurance broker, this is typically been done by your risk advisor. So that's the time they are involved. And then you've got, as you say, Philip, the construction insurances covering for property damage, physical loss, physical damage to project assets. You've got typically, depending on the project setup, whether you've got non-recourse project finance involved or not, and what your risk appetite is, you can buy protection against lost revenue. And there are different levels of coverage. You can buy either coverage for gross revenue, or you only cover your senior debt service and standing charges, fixed cost, and the likes. And these two together are, I think, the biggest chunk, like 97% of the total insurance premium. And then you've got other areas like third-party liability for third-party claims, and numerous other insurance products you can buy if you want. But I think the most important part is the construction risk, later on operational risk, covering for the property damage to reinstate, and then the loss of revenue protection.
Yeah, I mean, very good. The affordability is a big topic. The whole always has been, but obviously with some of the impacts, during COVID and after COVID, inflation, interest rates, and cost of capital increases. Bringing down the cost of offshore wind is something that's very, very important. How can offshore wind developers and other stakeholders use risk management to help reduce the cost of offshore wind?
That's my favorite question, Philip. And an area Marsh has really worked on for the past, I'd say, 5 to 6 years to find other ways, or not other ways, but to refine our strategy and our approach, how we can really help clients to drive down cost. As you say, costs have escalated across all different areas for offshore wind, from a cost of capital perspective, capex, inflation rates, everything, and insurance as well, right? And insurance during construction, we talk about maybe something depending what project and where it is, but let's say it's about 1% of capex, typically less, but on the safe side, it's maybe 1%. During operation, insurance typically is your second biggest line item, right? You've got the turbine service agreement, and then insurance kicks in as a second biggest line item. So if we were able to achieve, reasonable cost savings, it would have massive impact. And that impact is for the life cycle, because typically you would buy insurance for your 25, 30, 35 years. So what we've done is we've simplified the approach and call it risk before insurance. So we think like, let's move a little bit away the focus from only insurance, which really sounds strange for an insurance broker. But I think it's the most sustainable and most cost efficient way. And that's something we've, as a team, we have developed to really focus on, okay, what's actually the risk, right? And get a better understanding of risk. I always keep saying risk is a little bit like your mother-in-law, right? You can try to ignore it, but the more you do, the worse it gets. You really need to understand your risk first, and then to see what would you actually do if you had no insurance, right? If there was no insurance available, what would you do? You would find other ways to mitigate risk, right? And some measures make sense commercially, and some probably may not make sense. And then you find your right balance between, okay, how much risk do I retain? How much do I keep in my balance sheet as a project or as a corporation? And where do I really need to buy protection? If you ask me, Philip, I still believe we buy by far too much insurance in offshore wind. Too wide coverage, by far too low deductibles in some areas. And that is coin flipping to me, right? It's you pay 20 million for insurance and you get 20 million back from insurance. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we've looked at that and we've find ways to help clients understanding how you can positively influence your insurance cost by mitigating risk in other ways, like technically looking more into your technologies, your redundancies, your spare part concepts. So really technically mitigate risk, including, probably, if possible, giving you more buffer in your construction schedules and the likes. And then next, once you've done that, also to look into your supply and installation contracts and see how can we better allocate risk between the contractual parties. Probably not to put everything on project side, but to see how can we get better engagement with contractors. I know that's super difficult these days as they are also all pushing back. But we've identified areas where they're actually quite happy to take more control of risk, because risk should typically sit where it's best controlled. And once you've done that, so the technical part and the contractual part, you then can think of, okay, how much insurance do I buy in addition to wrap around the other two pillars? But I still feel very often we think of insurance first and only afterwards think of what can we do technically, what can we do contractually. And that's why insurance costs have exploded, right? And in particular on deductible side, where I know there's a lot pressure from contractors also during construction and also lenders who always look back, what have we done on the previous projects, which is a great benchmark, but doesn't really bring us forward. I think deductibles, we need to do more. And that's an area we currently focus on to help clients understand how can you significantly reduce your insurance cost by increasing deductibles to still acceptable levels.
Obviously, you've spent a lot of time, Martin, on this. And like you mentioned, the last 2 decades. Why do you do what you do?
I started with Marsh because someone told me if you join Marsh, you can go offshore, right? And I'm just a boring insurance person sitting behind my desk or on a plane to a client somewhere. So I felt like, jumping on a helicopter, going offshore, that sounds fantastic. I'm not an engineer. My father was. I was not an engineer. So that was my only option to really see what we are building, right? I like to see what we are building, right? I think everyone does. These turbines are monsters, and really terrific and very, very impressive. So for the first couple of years, I went offshore quite a bit with CTVs and helicopters, and I stayed on cable laying vessels for 2 weeks and so on. So something a little insurance broker wouldn't typically imagine. Yeah, and then I moved on and I felt like, okay, we can really make impact here, right? With, again, a topic that's not necessarily, something you want to discuss over the weekends in front of your fireside because it's not super attractive, but it is just super important, right? We will not be able to do offshore wind and we are not going to transition without insurance and a proper understanding of how we manage our risks. So that's what I can do, and that's where and it's not just me, right? We've got a massive team at Marsh looking at offshore wind, be it with lawyers and risk engineers and brokers and client advisors like myself, to really help our clients to manage their risks and to make sure they can at the end invest in those fantastic projects.
Yeah, it is really about impact. If you think about it, bringing on gigawatt scale renewables, impacting really generations. And it's something that's fundamentally needed. I mean, with the data center, hyperscaler demand for, AI, all the electrification, electric vehicles and so on, it is really making an impact. So yeah, it's I don't think, we talk about that enough. Well, what are some of your favorite, client stories where you've made an impact?
I like challenges, right? When, sometimes says, okay, this is not possible to challenge that. Or, typical perceived message from a client is insurance never pays anything, right? Then, just to demonstrate or prove that this is not true, or or we will find ways. I think that's where we are, and again, we as Marsh are quite strong, is really to find the solution, right? Go above and beyond, and trying to make things happen where others may say this is not going to happen. So I had a couple of areas where clients really thought, okay, this is not going to work from insurance perspective, and we were able to help them and found solutions which were super attractive, very sustainable, and also extremely cost efficient. I think that's where it makes also big fun, because being an insurance broker, you're perceived not necessarily to make people happy, right? Because again, insurance doesn't really make happy. It's just a necessity. But that's areas where, clients start smiling because you've really made some impact and helped them with an issue. I think that's what I like a lot about this. And then obviously where we really can make impact if things could go really wrong, right? And things go wrong. We do see massive, large offshore wind losses with export cables and also turbines to some extent, substations, causing our clients big trouble, time pressure, cost issues. And then, taking their hand and guiding them through those claims and making sure that everything is handled transparently and that we can very quickly resume operations or continue with construction. And at the end, they also get back some significant money from insurers. That's why we are here, right? We are here because things go wrong. And then we need to have someone who says, okay, you've dropped your ice cream. No worries. I'll get you a new one.
Martin, you've been in the industry for a long time. You've seen the evolution of offshore wind. How do you see where we are today, and how do you see us evolving moving forward?
No, we're talking about 26 megawatts. Some are even talking about bigger ones. It is so tough to say. And for everyone, right? And I also don't think that's really good. It's good to have ambitions. It's good to, foster innovation and enhance technologies and methods and everything. I'd agree with the industry that to some extent it's probably a bit too fast, because there are so many other issues we also have to solve. Issues like, not strong enough regulatory frameworks, issues in the capital market and so on. We'll move nonetheless, right? We are going to build bigger projects further offshore. Floating offshore wind, big topic. It's become a bit quiet in many areas. I think also because it's possibly the second step before we've really done the first step. But it will come. So it's a bright future still, and that's again why I'm here and why I'm still so positive and optimistic about offshore wind, because it provides so many benefits and advantages. We can't do the energy transition without offshore wind. It's not possible. So we'll stay on track and next to our clients to support where we can.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, the fundamentals are there. The need for power are there, and really, cost competitive, clean power is in scale. I don't see many other alternatives than offshore wind. So it's exciting times. I always like to ask this question just for the younger generation that's watching. If you could talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell him?
That's a simple answer, because I think I said earlier, my father used to be an engineer. And when I finished school, when I was 20, that was 2000. Being an engineer was not a great choice, right? There was a lot, unemployment, not enough jobs. Now looking back, and if I had combined my passion for, technical stuff plus renewable energy, it would have been a very good choice. I think offshore wind is exciting because of it's never, as I said, the same, right? It changes so quickly and it provides opportunities around the globe. Um, if you want to explore the world, you can explore the world and see other cultures and countries and jurisdictions and work in a field where you do good for the planet, um, and build big things, right? Big things with a very, very good purpose. So I think it's a very good area to work. And it was this week or end of last week where the Global Wind Energy Council issued the new workforce report saying like we need hundred thousands of people only in the wind space, not just offshore wind, but it includes obviously offshore wind. And we are far behind, right? I think it's one of the biggest threats, still very much underestimated in my view, is where do we get the talents? And that includes insurance, by the way. So it's a very good area to work. You do good for the planet, and it's so interesting because it's a fast-changing environment as well. So can definitely say, please come and join us.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been a fascinating dive into the importance of insurance for offshore wind. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you very much, and great to see you. Thanks, Philip.